You're on air.
All right, excellent. I'd like to call to order the work session for February 2nd. Our first item of business tonight is the Clackamas County Water Environmental Services State of the District, which will be presented by the WES Director, Greg Geist. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and councilors. This is actually WES's second annual report presentation to the City of Milwaukee. I will attempt to share my screen and get going here. Oh, hang on. Well, let's just see this first.
There we go.
Oh, that's not right. Well, let's try this. I'm sorry, I'm having a technical problem.
The world of Zoom. Isn't it wonderful?
Okay, let me try it one more time. All right. Does that work for folks?
Yeah. Yep.
Excellent. Okay, again, thanks for the time. I don't know if this will take an hour, but I certainly appreciate having that much time with you, and I'm happy to spend as much time as possible answering any questions that you might have. So just to start out, obviously it's been an extraordinary year for WES and for the community with the pandemic, the fires. We had prolonged electrical outages. We had fires adjacent to our facility, and more recently we had localized flooding. And I just want to first acknowledge the hardworking and dedicated staff of WES. You know, as part of the pandemic, in order to have resiliency within our organization, we split our work groups, shifted people's work, reporting locations, their schedules, and very disruptive. And really, they didn't miss a beat. We've been at work the whole time. Well over half of WES employees are coming to work at our facilities every day. And those that can work remotely are doing a fine job at that. So just some background for some folks that might be new. WES serves about 190,000 people in the urbanized area of Clackamas County, from Happy Valley down to Milwaukee and West Lynn, Oregon City, Gladstone. We also have facilities up on Mount Hood at Hoodland and all the way out to Fisher Forest Park there in Clackamas County. We have 5 treatment facilities. The most prominent one for Milwaukee is obviously our Kellogg Creek facility there on the banks of the Willamette River. We treat over 7 billion gallons of wastewater per year, and we have over 360 miles of sewer pipe in the ground and 23 pumping stations. Like I said, Kellogg's right in your backyard, so I was going to start there. That facility was built in 1974, and over the years degraded to the point where it needed significant upgrades. In 2017, we began a significant refurbishment and replacement series of projects. There are 12 in total, and those are coming online or have come online, and we're very, very near the end of that phase of projects. I also wanted to, in addition to the repair, refurbishment, modernization, we did include a good neighbor related project there where we covered portions of our aeration basins that were identified through an odor study as contributing to odors in the neighborhood. So hopefully we're seeing a significant improvement there. And since picture's worth 1,000 words, I'm going to show you a video that talks about all of the work that we've been doing at Kellogg. Let's start from the beginning. Can folks hear and see that?
Not seeing a video right now.
Okay, hang on.
You'll probably have to unshare and then share your screen again with the YouTube.
Okay. Technology. All right, do folks see that? Are we seeing that?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
There's a lot of indecision about what was going to happen to Kellogg in the future, whether the plant was actually going to stay or be moved in the late 1990s and aughts. And so Wes didn't want to make an investment in a plant that might be demolished. So the plant went really beyond what it should have without having rehab work and just maintenance work done on it. Just like maintaining your house, if you don't take care of things, the problems get more expensive. So we upgraded and took care of things that needed maintenance throughout the plant. And we also, where we replaced equipment, we put in more modern, more energy efficient equipment.
They're a lot more reliable than the old equipment that was here. A lot less wear and tear. That means that we don't have to fix them as often. So we're freed up to do other things around the plant instead of working on old, broken equipment.
So these are Howden Turblex variable vane blowers that we've installed for this project. These give us a lot more flexibility and control and reliability in performing the aeration of the process. They have been a dramatic improvement. They are much more stable and efficient than a previous installation. One of the major projects related to the aeration basins was the addition of RAS piping, or return activated sludge piping, from inside the blower building around all that electrical equipment that brought that material to exterior and dispersed it across the aeration basins, eliminating electrical hazard risk in the blower building. We also added new flow metering, new valve control that helped stabilize and balance the flow between all 4 aeration basins. One of the things that we did to benefit the local area, the community around the plant, was to put additional covers on top of the aeration basins to trap the odorous air and allow us to draft it up through this odor duct piping into our biofilters. We upgraded a bulk of the electrical equipment related to the influent pump station. Master control panel, conduit leads to the VFDs for the pumps, and all the electrical in the building. This created a lot of resiliency and improved wiring that was very old and out of date. We were able to divide the dry well connection to the wet well, which improved odorous gases, operator safety, and provided an access point exterior to the building to reach the wet well to do cleanings and service work. So this is part of the Kellogg project. It was the addition of a dispatchable standby generator. We have redundancy as backup power in the treatment plant itself, but also a backup to the community grid, which allows them to automatically shift power to the grid if we have high demand scenarios and keep the grid from failing. It also, with this addition, was a switchgear that allowed us to diversify the power throughout more aspects of the plant and put us in a situation where we have more of the plant on backup power, so when we do have power failures, we have more resiliency and more processes staying online. We upgraded both the electrical systems in this pump station and the pumps themselves for both efficiency and resiliency. This process was also tied into the electrical grid as part of the DSG, or dispatchable generator upgrade. So this was one of the processes previously not on backup power. It is now on backup power and in full function when it is under backup power. What we have here as part of the Kellogg project is the addition of the flow management system, which just allows us to retain some hydraulic capacity that we had lost in the plant some years ago. This system allows, under storm conditions, high flow, high hydraulic conditions, to peel off some of the flow from the primary clarifiers, divert it directly to disinfection, and also helps retain some of our biological process in the aeration basins during these high flow peak wet weather events. This is our W3, or reclaim pump station project, that is improving upon our pump station that supplies wash water, reuse water all across the plant. It's going to provide both disinfection and consistent pressure and reliable backup to a system that has not had that historically.
What we've put in are more energy efficient blowers. We've also put in more energy efficient water pumps. We've put in a more energy efficient standby generator too. So all this will save the ratepayers more money in the end.
We're going to be upgrading our disinfection system, either replacing UV or adding chlorination for all of our disinfection. We're going to be doing a major remodel on the admin building and working with our neighbors on what that should look like and what it should include. We're also going to upgrade our solids treatment part of the plant. Right now, we haul solids to Tri-Cities for treatment. With treatment here, we'll greatly reduce the number of trucks in and out of the Kellogg facility. We work with the neighbors throughout this project, notifying them of when there were going to be shutdowns or when there might be more odors or when there might be more noise. And the resulting work leaves us with a better treatment facility. We're just fixed up our house. We're a better neighbor.
I've worked here for 25 years, 27 years, and I feel part of this community. I know my neighbors, they know me, and I just look forward to being a great steward of this facility and working many more years here, being part of this community.
We're pretty much the last line of defense for the river. We take all the wastewater from everyone in our district. This place is important because without it, you couldn't boat, you couldn't swim, you know, you really couldn't do anything connected to the water around here.
Okay. All right, I think we're back. And Lynn, I guess, kind of stole, oh, shoot, hang on. I guess we can learn some gardening while we're here today. Unfortunately, the video keeps running to whatever the next video is on the channel, so I apologize for that. Okay, Lynn, like I said, one thing I wanted to elaborate on a little bit is what we call the DSG, the dispatchable power generation. If you look on this picture, you can see Highway 99, and about 3/4 of the way up the top of the facility next to the freeway, there's that big green box. And that's a great partnership that we have with Portland General Electric, where they essentially fund a good portion of that work, and it's a partnership, really. They have these units. We have one at our Tri-City facility as well. They have them in Intel and large industrial facilities that need backup power on occasion if the grid goes down. But what PGE's interest in that is they're required by law to maintain a certain amount of generating capacity to be used, during a summer heat wave or something. And it doesn't make any sense in a lot of ways for them to have to build a dam or a big combustion turbine and not use it very often, or hardly at all. And so we have the benefit of being able to use that. And then PGE they've got a control center in downtown Portland and a grid of these things all over the state that they can control and send power to their grid to make sure that they've got the redundancy and the capacity and the resiliency. And having these dispersed, across the state rather than a single point of failure, say at a combustion turbine, is a real benefit for PGE. So we're very, very proud of that program. As far as what's next, Lynn stepped through many of the projects, but I did want to mention also our new administration offices. So the building that fronts the park is our administration building. It was also built in 1974. And it's like anybody that's been there, it's like walking into 1974. And at the time, the laboratory for this facility was contained in that building. We've subsequently built a combined laboratory on our Tri-City campus in the mid-90s. And so most of the laboratory analysis that we previously did at Kellogg and have the space and built the space for are now being performed at our Tri-City facility. So we have a real opportunity to modernize and upgrade that administration building and free up some space in the center of the plant for future treatment processes. So we're excited about that. We're kicking that off. We've already kicked it off. We have an architect on board and more to come on that. The other thing that Lynn didn't mention and I'm really excited about is we are going to be putting electric car charging stations within the fence at Kellogg and within the fence at Tri-City. And we're also exploring putting one outside of the fence at Kellogg for the public use, and ultimately having our biogas generate the power for that electric vehicle charging station. So that would be very, very cool. And we're looking hard at getting that done.
So Greg, I actually have a question related to that.
Sure.
At Kellogg now, are we maximizing the collection of biogas?
No. So one of the things that we're doing that's in our 5-year capital improvement plan is we call it solids handling. But you see the two big tanks in the lower left-hand corner. Those were put in maybe late 80s or so. And there's an engine generator associated with those that is also 1980 something vintage and not nearly as efficient as, say, what we just installed at our Tri-City facility. So we do have a funded project in our capital improvement plan to greatly increase the efficiency of that system. At the same time, Lynn did mention that we run 5 to 6 trucks out of Kellogg per day that go down to our Tri-City facility with the material that's contained in the liquid material that's contained in those digesters, those round tanks that you see at the lower left-hand corner. Part of that project would be to install centrifuges like we have at the Tri-City facility and a load-out facility. So it would take essentially what is water coming out of those tanks. It's about 2% solids, thicken that up into it's surprisingly only still about 22-23% solids, but we call it cake. It looks like moist dirt, really. And so that would take, as part of that project, we'd go from running 5 to 6 trucks out of that facility a day to maybe 1. But that's all part of that solids handling upgrade that we're in the process of planning right now. And feel free to ask questions along the way. We can have a conversation. Happy to answer anything you have along the way.
You don't have a timeline yet for the dewatering?
I don't have my my capital improvement plan in front of me, but I think it's 2 to 3 years out.
3 years out.
3 years out. Thank you, Chris. Okay, and like I said, we recently, are completing significant upgrades at our Tri-City facility. That picture that you see there on the left of the 3 tanks and the bubble in the middle of the green spot, that's what we are working on right now. That tank, that 1.3 million gallon digester came online already. And so the next phase of that project is to refurbish the existing 2 digesters. We've installed a new engine generator. So the engine generator, what takes and burns the biogas at our Tri-City facility was the same vintage as the Kellogg facility. It was a 250 kilowatt engine generator, and we replaced it with a 600 kilowatt engine generator. So we're more than doubling our energy production capacity at the Tri-City facility. Part of that process is the engine generator that we had and the one that we have at Kellogg runs on biogas, which is actually, it's not methane. It's a combination of methane and several other gases that are produced. And so that gas, to run a modern a diesel engine efficiently, you need clean fuel. And so part of the project that we would be putting in at Kellogg and that we are constructing at Tri-City is to scrub that gas and then provide some storage for it. That is that gray bubble that you see in the middle of the green spot there at the Tri-City. And actually, that's not reality quite yet. That's a drawing, but it's close. So that'll be a big upgrade. So by installing a bigger engine generator, more efficient, scrubbing the gas, and having a place to store it so that that engine generator can run efficiently and consistently rather than going on and off is going to greatly improve our performance there. So just a little bit about the wastewater process. It's really a combination of mechanical, biological, and chemical treatment. So working from left to right, we have our preliminary treatment and primary treatment. That's the mechanical piece. And for anybody that's been through one of our facilities, the first place that you walk into is the bar screen room or the influent pump station. So basically the waste comes in and we pump it and we put it through bars or screens to remove some of the big stuff. And then we remove the grit by slowing the material down and using centrifugal force. And then we slow it down even more in the primary treatment, the sedimentation basin, which allows the solids to settle out and whatever's going to float to the top. And we skim both the bottom and the top. And that material is then sent to our digesters. So from there, and that treatment up until the 60s was really wastewater treatment in the United States and kind of just what everybody did. However, beginning in the 60s and 70s, water quality standards got more stringent and treatment got better. And so then we added, as an industry, secondary treatment, which is the biological piece. And so that's those big roiling basins that are brown, but they're not brown because it's poop. They're brown because of the microorganisms that are doing the work. And what they basically do is greatly increase the natural process to degrade the biological material that goes down your toilet. So the same thing would happen in nature, but we do in a day what nature would take a month to do or more. So from there, it goes into clarification, which is again more settling, and finally to disinfection. And that can either be chemical with the use of essentially bleach to kill any remaining harmful pathogens, or UV light. And this particular diagram shows how things work at our Tri-City facility, where we use both UV light and chemical disinfection. As Lynn mentioned, at our Kellogg facility, we use a UV system. It was actually the first UV system in the state of Oregon for disinfection, and it has reached the end of its useful life. So that's another project that's on, replacing that is another project that's on our 5-year capital improvement plan. So those bugs, we call them bugs, the microorganisms, we use them to clean the wastewater, and then they die. And we have to do something with them. So they also, we call it wasting, but it's not really wasting, but we harvest them and pump them also into the digesters. So what goes into the digesters is a combination of the material that comes into the plant, the solids material, and the carcasses essentially of the bugs that we use in our biological process. Again, those digesters are a lot like big stomachs. You feed them food, you feed them rich food, and they make gas. And then we use that gas to make energy. And then once everything's treated, the solids portion of what goes into the anaerobic digester is then thickened using that centrifuge, creates a natural fertilizer that is used for agricultural purposes out in Eastern Oregon. So we burn the gas, we make fertilizer and send that fertilizer out east and discharge clean water back into the river. We also, I mentioned the laboratory. We have a laboratory on our Tri-City campus. We do over 30,000 analyses per year. Some of that is regulatory compliance. We need to make sure that we're meeting our Clean Water Act obligations, but most of those analyses are in order to operate the treatment process. I like to say it's a complex and living machine, and sometimes it's as much of an art as a science to operate it. And so the operators use the data and that judges the health of the system to make operational changes throughout the year. A couple other things I wanted to mention along the lines of resiliency. We're really proud of the 82nd Drive Bridge. That's the picture there on the right. That's a bike and pedestrian bridge that goes between Gladstone and Oregon City at the High Rocks area, just downstream of High Rocks. We have wastewater pipes on those bridges, on that bridge. And we recently completed a project to do seismic upgrades to that so that it can withstand a Cascadia type event. So that bridge is now more seismically stable than the I-205 bridge there at High Rocks or the highway, especially the Highway 99 bridge down in Gladstone and Oregon City. The other thing that we're working on, and we had a ballot measure pass in Oregon City that's going to allow us to proceed with this project, and that is to install a second outfall into the Willamette River from our facility. Our facility in Oregon City is located adjacent to the Clackamas River, but we discharge to the Willamette River because it's bigger and because, frankly, state law precludes us from discharging to the Clackamas River under what they call the three basin rule. So what we're planning on doing is to install a pipeline partly dug and partly bored from our facility into the Willamette River. And that will give us much more flexibility. We'll have two outfalls that we can utilize. And then for future growth and future wet weather events, we will have additional capacity. The other really positive thing about that project is we looked in the planning stage at where the optimum place in the river would be for an outfall. And we found an area that is much deeper in the river and has much better mixing than our current outfall location does. So it would be a benefit to water quality to put it there, and we think we can land it there. That would then become our primary effluent outfall, so we would realize those water quality benefits throughout the year. So just like Milwaukee, we have a collection system and pipes and pump stations that we use cameras to take a look at. We clean them, we flush them, we maintain them. Again, just like Milwaukee does in their own collection system. I'm gonna start introducing this I&I topic now. For those of you looking at the slides, the lower right-hand picture is one of our pipes. It's a gap in one of our pipes, and that is a snake's head poking through. So I'm sure you can imagine if a snake can fit through there, water is going to come in through that joint as well. And that's what we don't want. So just to give you an idea of the work that we're going to be doing in our collection system, at least the major capital work, all of the red areas are areas that we need to either refurbish or expand. And so these are the areas that we are going to be working on over the next some number of years in order to provide capacity. Something to say about that. One of the conversations, I'll go to the next slide. So this slide is essentially the same West Service area. And we did a comprehensive collection system master plan that included modeling of flows and predictions for future flows, and basically put flow meters out throughout the system and then did computer modeling to identify those areas that have high rates of inflow and infiltration. So inflow and infiltration, I'll talk a little bit or show you a little more about what that looks like. But inflow is things like downspouts that get connected to the sanitary sewer rather than the storm sewer, or even sometimes street catch basins that can be we call it a cross connection because they shouldn't be connected, but sometimes they are or they have been in the past. So that is inflow, direct inflow through a pipe into our sanitary sewer system. Infiltration is the more insidious problem, and that is leaky pipes, cracked joints like you saw, or separated joints, cracked pipes, manholes that leak, things like that. That allows groundwater to enter into our system and rainwater, and that's a big problem. Our studies show that these red areas shown on this map are the ones that have the biggest problem with inflow and infiltration. We also calculated that, you know, it's a zero-sum game, really. All of that water that gets into our system has to be treated at our treatment plant. That's the Clean Water Act, and we're required to do it. From a financial standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense to build treatment capacity and use chemicals and use electricity and spend money to treat essentially rainwater and groundwater. So it makes a lot of sense to keep it out of the system and to tighten up our system rather than building that additional treatment capacity either at Kellogg or at our Tri-City facility. And according to our projections, if we do that collectively and together over the next 20 years, we can save our ratepayers collectively over $100 million. So that's what we're really focused on right now. We're having conversations with the city technical staff, city engineers, city public works folks. And also we're moving that into the policy realm with our WES Advisory Committee. Currently, we have a kind of a special agreement with Milwaukee where we would fund, WES would fund 10% of inflow and infiltration reduction projects within the city of Milwaukee. We have not been taken up on that offer, and so we think our percentage is probably a little low. And so right now, the discussion on the table is raising that to 33%. And seeing if that stimulates the kind of work within the system that we know needs to happen. And we're kind of looking at a 3 to 5 year pilot project on that, and you know, seeing if it works. But again, this is at the conceptual stage right now. We're working with our advisory committee. Ultimately, it'll need to go to the board, and it will ultimately need to go to the city councils to get agreement and to march forward together on this. So just to give you a little visual on inflow and infiltration, the schematic on the left pretty much shows it, the roof drain that gets connected, the foundation drain that gets connected to our system, in some cases the storm cross connection, and then the cracks and the breaks in the pipe. And as we, like I said, we have over 360 miles of pipe in the ground. Some of it's quite old, and the longer it's in the ground, the more leaky it is. The two pictures on the right, obviously, that is infiltration. Looks like there's a separated joint on the lower one and a defect in the pipe on the upper one that is allowing a lot of groundwater to enter our system, and that's what we're trying to eliminate.
So, question on that: Are you guys changing the way you're laying pipe? Are you using mechanical connections now to avoid those kinds of separations in the future?
You know, so you'll notice that that's a concrete pipe on top, and I don't know the material. It almost looks like a clay pipe on the bottom. And yeah, no, we use PVC pipe now, and so it's much tighter, and those joints are much tighter as well. In the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a lot of concrete pipe. Clay pipe is much older than that, but it wouldn't surprise me if we still have a little bit of that in our system. But all the new construction is PVC.
And Mayor Gamba, that's the same for Milwaukee. On our newer construction, we're using PVC piping as well.
And what's the, I mean, I know it's to some extent a guessing game, but what's the best guess as to the extent to which I&I is happening through actual, you know, main lines, transmission lines versus people's own property lines?
Well, and Peter, feel free to jump in. It really depends on the area and the pipe material. That's why, you know, when we think about our community, whether it's Gladstone, Oregon City, Milwaukee, each city is unique and their issues are unique. Oregon City is currently looking at replacing laterals up to the house, and for them and their system, that might make a lot of sense. For us, there was an area called the Rock Creek Basin out near Happy Valley. that is our leaky basin. And we think that is not going to be the same issue because the development is newer, the system should be tighter, but it runs down, our trunk line runs down a creek bed. And so we're pretty sure that we're getting significant inflow or infiltration on that main trunk line rather than farther up in the system. But it really depends on the neighborhood and the configuration of the mains and proximity to water bodies and things like that. We don't know, and that's why we do the comprehensive master planning and then follow up with more detailed analysis of those subbasins to find out what the correct remedy is.
So here in Island Station near the Kellogg plant, a few years ago, and I think it was before Peter's time and before our current engineering director's time by a year or two, but they did a project on a pipe that runs down sort of at the water's edge of the Willamette. They called it 18th Avenue. I guess there's a right of way down there. They did a project to reline the pipe. Mm-hmm. How effective are those kind of projects?
They're extremely effective. We also have a program for lining, mm-hmm. and it's very effective.
And if I could add a little bit, so as part of our master planning effort that we're doing on the wastewater for our wastewater utility, we spent some significant time over the last 18 months doing some flow monitoring of our collection system. And, we're using that information to identify areas where we have infiltration and inflow that's excessive. I think the good news is that we've found that we're better than we thought we were. We've done a lot of work in the community to replace the clay pipes that were in there. So we've gone in, with the exception, I think, the Waverly subdivision. That's the last big project that we have that has some clay pipes. So we need to do that project. But for the most part, we've replaced all the clay pipe in our community. The next piece that we'll be doing is, we'll be evaluating as part of the wastewater master plan, evaluating that data and building the projects that we need to do to reduce infiltration and inflow. And those will generally be slip lining or point repairs in the system to fix those areas. And then, after we get there, the next place that we would look is the laterals and the connections that we have into the system. And I anticipate we'll sometime over the next several years, we'll start to do some more smoke testing in the community to see where we have I&I issues as they relate to the laterals.
That raises a question for me I have about maybe the slide before. I know that yours, our staff and West staff, get together in this technical group often. And I know that these numbers are based on, some older data than what we have here at the city. And I guess, my question is just sort of more of a, exchange of information and how that exchange of information will sort of inform this process of designing kind of a big, program, that Wes would take, to all of our partner cities. Because I think, Peter, you've just sort of described, you just kind of scratched the surface of a lot of capital, that the city has already spent on that has reduced I&I in our, in our city-owned system. And so I guess my question is sort of, will that newer data be incorporated into any kind of a proposal? And Greg, I have to apologize to you for missing last Thursday. I couldn't make it. And so if you've already answered this question, I apologize, but I thought it would be a worthy question to raise here at the group anyway.
Well, if I can speak a little to a little bit of that. So I think analysis of our flow data, our in the sewer system from 2019 and 20 indicate that some of the assumptions that were made as part of the original I&I study that Wes did were perhaps more aggressive in terms of how our pipes were degrading. So I think when you look at it per acre of infiltration and inflow, we're a lot better off than what was anticipated from data back in 2015. And that's a combination of some new flow data, the investments that we've made in our system, our crews doing maintenance and making repairs to the system as well. I think the good news would be that we don't necessarily, it'll be easier for us to meet that 65% I&I reduction that Wes is looking for.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great example of, the cities know more, a lot more about what is going on in their systems and how to fix it. And so that's why we're, and again, it's conceptual at this point, but rather than having some kind of technical, well, I hesitate to say a plan, but some kind of comprehensive, you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and this is when it's going to happen. That would be a very complicated thing to put together. Not that it couldn't be done, it would be expensive. But knowing that the cities know what they're doing and they know what's going on in their system, if we had a program where, and we know that collectively we need to meet a certain target, and we know these basins are where we're going to invest that to get it, then why not try a pilot and say, if it's in this basin, if it's an I&I reduction project that is intended to meet these types of goals, whether that's in some cases studies. I think Gladstone is regionally famous for being, not having invested in their system, and they may still need money for studies for I&I. Someone like Milwaukee would have different needs to help with the I&I. Oregon City, again, they're looking, they believe that they can get a good bang for their buck by going after the laterals. So it's going to be a different answer for everybody. I think as long as we can agree on a framework and work together and communicate and be able to articulate or calculate our progress, that would be a model that I would like to work with. But again, it's conceptual at this point. The advisory committee needs to weigh in on it, and the board needs to weigh in on it, and you folks need to weigh in on it.
And I would add too that as one of the things that we've consciously done at the staff level with Public Works and Engineering is we've held off on some of our slip lining projects because we want to wrap up the analysis that we're doing as part of the master plan to make sure that we're investing those dollars where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, and we can get with Wes and make sure that they can partner with us on those projects. So we've held off on some of those projects for right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that would be an ongoing conversation. Wes's ability to fund 33%. We did take a cursory look at all of the capital improvement plans and the I&I related plans in the cities, all the cities' current 5-year capital improvement plans, and believe that we can pretty comfortably fund that 33%. Now, if there's we would have to have a kind of an annual conversation around budget and which projects would be submitted and build that into our budget. But if we had an embarrassment of riches and all these I&I projects came in the door and everybody was chomping at the bit, that wouldn't be a bad thing. That would just mean that we would have to have more conversations about financing and timing so that we can support that. But again, this is a 20-year effort for us. And me, I'm kind of a keep it simple kind of person, and I, build trust and give the cities the maximum flexibility and just keep our eye on the ball. I think our technical staff are working well together. They know this stuff inside and out. They know where the money needs to be spent, and they know where to make progress. So. Shall I move on?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. All right, just getting into some dollars and cents. About 64% of your ratepayer dollars go to operation and maintenance, 17% to that infrastructure financing. We have a 5-year capital improvement plan that's right around $220 to $230 million. And we need to fund that. And then 19% goes to the debt payments, and that's from the $130 million membrane bioreactor and pumping station and pipeline that was installed in 2011. We're fortunate at West. We haven't seen a huge, really a significant decline in revenue, at least not yet. We did early on in the pandemic decided to waive late fees this year for the duration of the pandemic and probably beyond. And also promoted our low-income discount program, which if you reach, I think it's 185% of federal poverty level, you get half off your bill. So, yeah.
Sorry, well, I just, the step further that we took it was we decided not to cut anybody off for non-payment during this period. Did you guys also do that?
Yeah, we've always had the policy of not shutting off service. It's just, it's a public health. If it backs up, it's a public health hazard. So we never disconnect or plug a lateral. No. So looking at Milwaukee's rates, we're at $37.95 per month. When you look back over 5 years, that's about an average of 2.9% rate increase year over year. Because of some magic that Chris and his team worked relative to that debt payment that we were talking about, we were able to limit that rate increase this year to 0.13% or a nickel from 2019-2020 fiscal year.
Nice.
So, and this is what that looks like, $24.95 for that, the privilege of having your wastewater treated at the Kellogg facility, and then that $13 for the legacy debt service. All right. Another big, oh, go ahead.
Is the debt service a typical 20-year payoff? So it means there's 10 more years?
It was a 25-year debt issuance. We first issued debt in 2008. To start the construction. The last issuance was in 2010. So the debt will be out until about 2035.
Okay.
So some of you will recall that Wes really operated at 3 separate districts independently in the past. And 3 years ago or so, we formed a 190 that really brought all those into one legal entity. Because those districts were formed at different times and under different circumstances and existed kind of independently, there was not a common set of rules and regulations. So after we brought those under one roof, we realized we really need to go through these rules and regulations and make them consistent across our service area. And those are things like, stormwater performance standards, the water quality retention that we would require developers to build into developments to make sure that we are meeting our Clean Water Act requirements, the design, the facility types, how people connect to our system, conveyance design standards, pre-treatment requirements for industries that discharge to our system and have to do some amount of treatment before we're willing to accept it into our system and our treatment plant. And then some fiscal policies that I'll talk more. But it's really soup to nuts, everything from easements, maintenance, use of public property, all that stuff. And so it's a huge, huge project. And the timeline you can see on your screen. We do have a website dedicated to that. And quite a lot of outreach happening. So one of the things that I know you folks are going to be interested in is, well, first of all, SDC, so system development charges. So if someone constructs a single family home in our service area, we charge them a system development charge of $7,850. As part of our rules and standards revision, and the amount that we charge for an SDC needs to be proportional to the impact of that unit of development is going to have on our treatment works. Basically, we need to build it, and they need to pay for it. What we found, and some very smart people at West looked into water use records and living area square footage using county and other records, 23,000 in total. And we found a very strong correlation between the living area of a home and the impact, the amount of water use, and therefore the amount of water that would come to us. And so what we're proposing is to tier that SDC. So somebody comes in with a single family residential development and it's 800 square feet or 801 square feet. We would charge that 90% of that $7,850. Less than 800 square feet, that would be 70%. We're also proposing that ADUs be charged 60% of that $7,850. We think this is a fairly innovative way to do it. It's driven by data, and that's really our charge, is to make sure that the system development charges we charge reflect the impact to our system. And we think by analyzing it this way and setting it up this way, we can do that. Any questions on that? All right. So some of you probably know that urban stormwater runoff is the biggest source of pollution in Oregon. We take that very seriously. We have a Clean Water Act permit. It's called an MS4 permit. So does Milwaukee. And so we do a lot of work to help manage that surface water and rainwater that lands on our yards and on our industries, and make sure that it's as clean as possible before it reaches a stream. One of our flagship programs is we call it the River Health Stewardship Program. It's a grant program. And this past year, we gave out $300,000 to 14 different organizations. And they're focused on outreach, education, riparian restoration. And really, even though it's not happening necessarily in Milwaukee, it's certainly benefiting the Milwaukee's water quality as it flows through Milwaukee and our watersheds in general. We also do watershed health education. We did that with Bilquist and Whitcomb. We have partnerships with the Audubon Society, North Clackamas Watershed Council. Basically, just want to let you know we're committed to healthy streams and how they support both the environment and the people in it.
And I will say kudos to you. I mean, although you said they're not all in Milwaukee, you did actually give a river health grant for a project in our industrial area along International Way, along Minthorn Creek.
Oh, yes, good. Yes, that's good.
And that work, there's some volunteer work parties. I'm signed up for one on Saturday. They're starting to remove ivy along their 400. It's Dave's Killer Bread, yep. And they've got a 450-foot stretch of Minthorn Creek that runs through their property. There's ivy removal this Saturday and next Saturday, and then planting in March. So it's very exciting to see that work happening. And I'm hoping that that will be a catalyst for others in the industrial area to pay some attention to Minthorn Creek.
Good. So for some of you folks, you've probably heard about what we call our Carly Creek project. And that was a wetland constructed wetland project that we did in the industrial area of Clackamas County, down on the river, where we replumbed about 400 acres of industrial area stormwater runoff to run through a 15-acre treatment wetland. That's been our flagship project. We're super proud of it, and we've gotten awards for it, but we're not resting on our laurels. This is the next big thing, and I hope you guys are excited about this too, because it's directly adjacent to your city. This is the Three Creeks area next to the Aquatic Center there in Clackamas Community College. We own, it's about an 89-acre site. It's a combination of ownership, I think, between us and forget. Let me see. DTD. Okay. Yeah. And then North Clackamas Parks, we have a contract with them to do maintenance on this facility. So this is going to be the next big thing. We call it Three Creeks because Mount Scott, Phillips, and Dean Creeks all converge on this property, which then flows down into Kellogg Creek and to the Willamette River. So it's a, as you can see, there's either industrial development to the south or other types of development to the north, all around this facility, but it's kind of a gem in the rough, right in the middle of a densely urbanized area. So we see huge, huge potential here. So some of the goals for this project, you know, right now we're in really phase one. We did secure some funding for it, and we're doing field work, we're doing data collection, hydraulic modeling, and looking at alternatives analysis, how we can get the biggest bang for our buck, and preliminary design. There's also beginning, and there will be a whole heck of a lot more public outreach associated with this. I don't know if Shelley Perini.
Yeah, I'm here. I got back on.
Great. You want to take a crack at that?
Sure. So we saw this, that the Three Creeks natural area was really called out in your comprehensive plan, your updated comprehensive plan. So we want to thank you for that. It is a really important asset to the community. I've been involved with the Harmony Community Campus visioning efforts for well over a decade. So we know that there are a lot of stakeholders who care deeply about this space and the place and the natural environment. And while the core goals that we called out are really water quality and floodplain storage, we know that it's also an important area for passive recreation. I was just out there last Friday. People were riding their bikes. There was an educational class, the trackers group. People were walking their dogs. So we wanted to make sure that you knew that we have a very in-depth public involvement plan. This is the beginning of it. You're the first that we're out talking with, and then we'll be keeping you posted and engaged often. So it kicks off really this spring. We'll have a website up most likely in March. And if you have any recommendations for us along the way, or if you would like a deeper presentation perhaps this summer, we'd be happy to come back.
I think we would probably like that. Yeah, it's an extraordinary spot. It's one of the few remaining white oak, Oregon white oak groves in the Willamette Valley, actually.
Absolutely. Great. Well, then we'll be committed to keeping you engaged and posted along the way. And the spring will be probably the first touch point back. And then the summer might be a good opportunity for a work session.
Cool.
All right. And then some of the other good work we're doing out there in the watershed. This is our third year of our partnership with Solve. It's our summer waterways cleanup series. That kicked off this year at Three Creeks, or last year at Three Creeks. Yeah, and we're going to do it again. We've collected thousands of pounds of trash near or sometimes in local waterways and prevented a lot of pollution from getting in our local rivers and streams. So yeah, we hope to kick off this year's event in late May, and it will in all likelihood take place at our facility there at Three Creeks. But we do them all over. I can't remember. Shelley probably knows the number of events that we did last year, but we do events all over the watershed at locations that are nearby streams. The other thing we're excited about is our work with students. We've, in the past, we haven't had the level of facility tours, obviously, in the past year, but we would bring thousands of kids through our facilities each year. However, through our education programs, we have touched over 1,200 students with West-funded education programs during school hours. And we had a very special, and this was Shelley Perini's baby, arrangement that we made with CASE, the Clackamas Academy for Industrial Sciences in Oregon City. As we were constructing that huge digester project, a very, very large excavation and engineering and construction project, we actually partnered with the constructor, J.W. Fowler, who was a construction company, and the engineer on that project, Jacobs, formerly CH2M Hill, along with our engineering staff. We reached out to CASE and essentially created a curriculum to help them understand what it's like and what it takes to design and build them, with the idea that and whether you're in the construction field or the engineering field or our field, we want to bring people into our industry. And this was just a wonderful partnership and an opportunity to work with CASE and their students. So we're very proud about that. We want to do more of that. Lastly, I wanted to just acknowledge and thank our advisory committee members, as well as obviously our commissioners. I want to thank Angel Falconer, Councilor Falconer, for she is the elected representative on WES's advisory committee. And then Tony Fields is the citizen representative. And for those of you who don't know Tony, he works for the state in the drinking water program. So he brings a depth of knowledge about just a slightly different angle. We're not drinking water, we're wastewater, but having a citizen person that has deep understanding of the drinking water world is helpful for us as well. So thank you for that. And with that, I always like to end these with offering a tour. So we will be in touch, and anybody who would like to see any of our facilities, we would be happy to arrange a tour at your convenience and let you know what we do. And I will say, hopefully, folks will back me up. The people that have taken those tours always come away surprised and impressed with the facilities and how we operate them. So thank you for that. We'll be in touch, and I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Yeah, I would have to say I've gotten to tour both Kellogg and Tri-City, or whatever, yeah. And they both were very impressive, interesting tours. It's well worth doing.
And if you do the Kellogg plant tour, Greg Irely gets really excited about getting out his fancy walkie-talkie headset so you can have your mask on and still hear and talk to one another comfortably. So it seems to kind of make his day.
Great.
We had some conversations in late 2019 through the Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee and other things about trying to have some more public tours. And I think, that's probably not in the cards in the next, 4 to 6 months, and maybe longer. But it would be nice to have, especially now that all the bulk of the work's been done, to have tours. I haven't been on a tour since, in 10 years or something. So I'd be interested to see.
I think Todd is still planning on it once we can safely do those again. Last time I talked to him was months ago, but we kind of agreed we'll park it until the pandemic is over. So I expect once we can do that, he'll give me a call. Great.
And Councilor Beatty, thank you for mentioning the Good Neighbor Committee, because I didn't mention that in my remarks, but they're a going concern, and I think the projects that we're working on now have to do with replacing some dead vegetation or stuff that's struggling, and making sure that we're staying on top of the beautification efforts around our facility. So thanks for that, and thanks for all that work.
Can I ask one question? You, at the very outset, you said something about recent localized flooding. Was that at Tri-Cities?
No, that was in our collection system. We have areas in our stormwater system that were constructed in the 60s, 70s. It just needs work. And when we have big soaking rain events, we had a 1 in 5 year rain event a few weeks ago, and it just overwhelms those systems. And so part of another project I didn't mention because it's not super related, but WES is also undertaking a stormwater system master plan and look at, so that we can have a deep understanding of our entire stormwater system and develop those capital improvement projects in order to take care of those problematic areas. And that would be the first time that Wes has ever had a master plan for stormwater.
In that high water event, Oak Lodge, as you may have known, had a spill into Kellogg Creek. You didn't have any overflows in that event?
Not from our treatment plants. We did have a pump station failure in West Lynn that released some amount, and that, we did have one sanitary overflow that I'm aware of, and that was reported to DEQ, but not at our treatment facilities.
Thank you.
We didn't have any sanitary sewer overflows in Milwaukee that I'm aware of.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you, Greg and Chris and Shelley.
Thank you.
Always interesting, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for being so generous with your time. I really appreciate it. It was great to chat.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Bye. Right. Our next item is kind of related. It's an update on the flood hazard regulations that will be presented by Brett Culber.
Yes, good evening. Let's talk some more about water. Mayor Gamba, councilors, nice to see you. My name is Brett Culver. I'm an associate planner with the city, and I'm here this evening with Beth Bertel from our engineering department to give you a little update in preparation for an item we want to come back to you in about a month on, and that is an update to the city's flood hazard regulations. So if I may, I will share my screen and see if I can get a couple slides going here. All right, so about a year ago in February 2020, I think we came to you in a work session setting to talk about this project we were going to embark on, the need to update our flood hazard regulations in order to stay compliant with some of the rules that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, has related to flooding. And so we are back. We're near the end of that project and want to see if we can set things up for you on that. So just as an overview of the community, Milwaukee obviously is touched on a lot of sides by water. We have our downtown frontage on the Willamette, and then we have Johnson Creek coming in from the north. We have Mount Scott Creek and Kellogg Creek coming in from the south. So there are definitely parts of the city that do experience some flooding along some of these creeks and the river area. And this map just kind of shows some of the areas that we have mapped, including those areas that FEMA provides us some information for, of places where you might expect what's called a 1% chance, 1% annual chance of flooding, or what some people refer to as the 100-year floodplain. We also have information provided by Metro related to some significant flooding events from 1996, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But just to give a little bit of an overview of the areas that we're talking about, there are about 250 properties in the city out of thousands that do have some kind of flood hazard designation on them. Our rules for flood protection currently live in Title 18 in the municipal code. And I think the idea here is to let some of the floodplain areas, those areas near creeks and rivers, do what they're naturally intended to do. They're a place for flood water to go when we have those kinds of events. And so by providing some regulations when we do allow development, making sure that it is mindful of those flood areas and where it's placing structures, where it's placing fill material, so that not only those properties and development on them are protected from flood events, but also that properties up and downstream don't suffer the effects of flooding. So that is this is the heart of our flood protection here in Title 18, and it is the main way that the city demonstrates and maintains its eligibility to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, which is a way that property owners who want to purchase flood insurance can do so affordably. We did a similar update about 12 or 13 years ago in 2008, and kind of we're back again with some new changes. These are largely administrative. They relate to adjustments in definitions, trying to stay current with the federal rules. We're working kind of in partnership with the state. The Department of Land Conservation and Development has provided us with a model ordinance, which is similar to what we used in 2008. So we're basically kind of looking at our current code and imposing the new changes where appropriate. So at this point in time, given the timeline and all the other projects that we have to do, this is not a time that we're going to be getting into a lot of big policy discussions. We know that the recently updated comprehensive plan has some significant, goals and objectives with respect to hazards, natural hazards, and flood hazard protection. And those conversations are important, and we do want to get to them, but know that they will take more time and definitely will want to engage the larger community in some of those discussions. So for now, we're just trying to meet the deadline that we have to stay compliant with the program. And to be clear, we're also not proposing any changes to the maps themselves. We depend largely on FEMA for the flood maps, and we are working, I think, with some partners to help see if we can do some updating to the maps, but that's not happening with this particular project. What we are proposing to do is we're basically going to repeal Title 18 and kind of adopt a whole new one, mostly because of the complexity of some of the numbering. And we're trying to get a little bit better numbering structure in that code. And it will just be cleaner if we repeal what we have and basically replace it with a new version that is similar, very similar in structure, but has a little bit different numbering. There are state building codes that have changed that we want to make sure we're referencing in general. We are trying to provide a little bit more of a structured process for what we're calling a floodplain development permit. And we're implementing a couple of simple things that we think will help us implement the rules. One example is requiring what are called non-conversion agreements. That's something that could be represented. An example would be if someone gets approval to build a new house, let's say in a flood area, and they meet the requirement of elevating the lowest livable floor a foot above the base flood elevation, but they also have an attached garage. The garage isn't a living space. It doesn't have to be elevated to the same degree. But what we'd want to capture with the non-conversion agreement is making sure that everyone's aware that that garage is not at a level that is okay for living space. So if that owner or a potential future owner wants to do what a lot of people in Milwaukee choose to do, and that is at some point need more space for their house, and they want to convert that garage, the non-conversion agreement would just make it clear that they won't be able to do that unless they also elevate the floor in that garage to the same protection level. So just a simple example of something we want to make sure that is a good practice that we're capturing in the code.
So
and then, sorry, go ahead.
Has to be, as I understood from the packet, that actually has to be registered on the deed somehow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be something that would show up in a title search for the property. The current code with respect to critical facilities such as sewage treatment plants, hospitals, fire stations, those kinds of things, it discourages them from being located within the 100-year floodplain. We know that the comprehensive plan has a goal of basically prohibiting them altogether in the 100-year floodplain. And what we want to do with this change was just take a step in that direction to say, basically, you cannot permit a new critical facility in the 100-year floodplain unless you're going to get a variance. So it just adds one higher level of review for that. And then we wanted to make sure that the 1996 flood data that we have already and have had kind of in our code for a number of years is actually applicable throughout the city. And so I want to just talk real quickly a little bit about that. So We do have information provided through aerial photographs from Metro of areas that did in fact flood in the 1996 flood event. And this is represented here with the reddish area on the map. And I guess one difference between this and the FEMA flood areas that we have is, the FEMA areas are based on, very good modeling and projection about where you can expect flooding to see. And a difference with the 96 flood information we have is this is where flooding actually occurred. So the definition that we have in our code that says what the level of 96 flooding was is tied to a particular elevation above sea level. It's effectively 38 feet. And the way the current code is set up, it really only deals with that one static number. So it says, by defining the 96 flood area as being at 38 feet, once you get into higher parts of the community, higher parts of the watershed. So for example, up in the Johnson Creek Boulevard area where the ground elevation is 100 feet, that we know we had some flooding from 1996 in those areas, but our code definition of a 38-foot flooding for 96 doesn't mean anything in those areas. So what we wanted to try to do is figure out how to make the information and data we had about the 96 flood more applicable throughout the city. So looking at the data that we have, doing some analysis, we noted that closer to the Willamette River with the actual areas of 96 flooding that we saw, it kind of a standard number of the level above the base flood elevation for the 96 flood areas was 2.4 feet. So our proposal is to use that 2.4 feet conversion factor to kind of help make the 96 flood data that we have apply throughout the community.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that I was clear what that meant. Looking at the maps, I think I am, but so does that mean that if the 100-year flood line, say up on Rusk Road, is, I'm just going to make up an elevation, is 50 feet above sea level, the new flood, assume you were in a flood zone number, will be 52.4 feet or whatever it was you just said, 2 point. Is that correct?
Right. Let me show you. I think the next slide might be an opportunity for me to try to answer that question and illustrate this. So this is aerial photos of two photos of the same property. The top one is showing what our mapping shows for the 96 flood area. The bottom one shows the FEMA 100-year floodplain map. So a couple things to get clear. One is that this 2.4 foot conversion factor would only apply within the areas on our maps that are shown to have the 96 flood area. So you can see my cursor. For example, this is my house. I'm wanting to do some kind of project in the house, like tear this house down and build one in the exact same footprint. I wouldn't be dealing with the 96 flood area at all. I would be subject to the requirements of the 100-year flood. So any part of this house that I'm changing within the 100-year floodplain area, I would be dealing with those rules. Now, Mr. Mayor, to get to your question, let's pretend this is on 19th Avenue, but let's pretend this is your Rusk Road example. And instead of 36 feet, let's say that the base flood elevation is 50 feet. And let's say that I was wanting to do a project on this property that got into this 96 flood area. That would mean that for the work I'd be doing in the 96 flood area, the flood protection level that I'd be working with would be 50 feet as the base flood elevation plus 2.4 feet. That's where my starting point would be of needing to get flood protection. And right now the code says whatever that flood protection starting point is, you elevate 1 foot above that. So
okay, it kind of does. I mean, the 96 flood, as I am recalling that history, was a upstream rain event, and the flooding was purely Willamette, and very little of it, or certainly to a far lesser degree, on the tributaries like Johnson Creek and Kellogg Creek. So the higher level of flooding didn't occur on those in that event. However, we have seen some events that caused the flooding to be higher than what the currently assumed 100-year floodplain is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was hoping that in this process, we were making some adjustments towards reality.
We effectively are, in that, like you said, the 96 flood event impacted areas closer to the Willamette more severely. But for example, in 2015, we did have a pretty heavy rain-based event that did impact Johnson Creek and some of those, like you said, tributaries a little higher up. Interestingly, our mapping does show 1996 flood areas up there in those parts of the tributaries. And so a sideways way to get at what you're wanting, which is a little bit more protection in some of those areas, is without at this point getting into a deeper analysis of the impacts of something like the 2015 event, by applying this 2.4 foot conversion within the 1996 areas, if I am on Johnson Creek and I'm trying to do something within an area that was shown as having flooded in 1996, which does have some overlap with the 100-year floodplain, I am going to be forced to build higher. I'm going to have to, if I'm doing it within what's shown as the 1996 flood area, I will have to kind of use my starting point as 2.4 feet above the FEMA base flood elevation. So it's not super precise. And again, we were not getting into a big policy go around here on this one, but it would start to have some of that effect that I think you're looking for. That is, if I'm on Johnson Creek, I'm doing something in the 96 flood area, I will be forced to go a little bit higher for my new project.
Okay.
Brett, I have a quick question. I know that we work with FEMA when there are flooding issues where a home is flooded, and FEMA does some assistance during a flood issue. So if I was talking to Councilor Nicodemus earlier today about just the fact that a lot of our naturally occurring affordable housing ends up being also in lands that are low lying. Can you talk a little bit about how, if a house is deeply impacted, they would either do reconstruction or where they could get some funds if they're in an affordable type unit? And I'm asking this because 50% or more of the structure may have to be rebuilt based on the amount of damage. And I just wanted to make sure we were having some conversation around whether or not this will add more cost to people who are struggling, who already are living in units, often in these areas. Does that make sense?
Good question. I don't know if Beth has more information about some of those funding sources. I think that is getting at something that is, I mean, the issue relates to what is going into the code. The code itself obviously doesn't provide funding for those kinds of situations. But you are correct that if a structure was substantially damaged, that is 50% or more of its market value is destroyed in some kind of event, it would have to be, if it's being rebuilt, it would have to meet the current standard. So it would have to come up to, maybe it was built before we had any flood rules and would have to, do that anyway, but it would have to come up to whatever we set as the new standard. I'm not very well versed on what kinds of funds, assistant funds, are available from FEMA. And I don't know, I could just ask Beth if she happens to know.
We can answer this also in the future conversation. I just I'm putting it out there because it's a discussion we had, and I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware it's something that we talked about. To figure out. Yeah.
We do, as a city, have some experience with this because in 2015, 2 or more houses up on Rusk Road, on the side of Rusk Road, not where the Milwaukee Center and the church is, but the other side of 224, flooded. FEMA did offer to buy those people out, to buy their properties and let the houses be removed, and the city did the removal and the revegetation. FEMA offered them, and Mark will remember this, I'm sure, I think they offered them 100% of fair market value if they had flood insurance, and they offered them 75% if they did not have flood insurance, because they wanted an incentive on people to have flood insurance. And as I know, only I think one home took took us up on that, as far as I recall. And Chuck Eaton, the former engineering director, oversaw that process of the demolition and the revegetation.
Absolutely. I think it's just something that as we're working on the staff report and as we're starting to think about what these changes actually influence in the city, it's just something we should be aware of, that we are disproportionately going to probably affect homes.
I'm not sure that's a really good assumption. I think there's a lot of fairly high income people on some.
That's true along the river.
Along the river and along Johnson Creek. I think there's some fairly, I'm not sure. I'd assume there's too much naturally occurring affordable housing.
The Rusk Road examples, do either of you remember if those were both owner occupied, or if one or either, if one of them was rental? Because I can think of some rentals there that are natural occurring affordable rental units up in that same Rusk Road area.
One was owned. I can't remember on the other one. So I would have to get back to you on that, Angel, but I can check.
Yeah, the one that took them up on it was owned. I know one that was owned was also owned, or one that didn't have flood insurance and therefore did not take them up on it was owned. And
owner occupied, you mean? Yeah.
Owner occupied, yeah. Yeah, sorry. But I'm not sure about the other two that were offered or affected.
And I guess based on the council's goals, I'm less worried about those where people have the money to pay for the insurance and to do the programming without us, and have the money to rebuild.
Right. I mean, the thing that I think Lisa's right about is what we're doing now is trying to protect people in the future who are low income, who are going to end up in these situations. We have zero control over what FEMA does or doesn't do as far as helping people whose homes currently exist in floodplains. And nothing we're changing about this rule will have any effect on that. The only way it would is, say, for example, somebody who's low income wanted to expand their house, put in an ADU or something, then yes, they would run into problem. But the likelihood of somebody who's that low income trying to put in an ADU in their house is also smaller.
Yeah, no, all fair.
Well, and to be clear, I think it's fair to say that none of what we're proposing in these changes will have a new impact with regard to that concept. I mean, right now, with the flood rules we have right now, if your structure is damaged by more than 50%, you have to, if you're going to rebuild it, bring it up to whatever our current standards are. So we're not introducing a new requirement. And even this 96, flood elevation conversion thing, it's really focused on where you do have to bring that level up to. So I suppose an example, if that property that you're concerned about was built recently, let's say within the last 10 years or so, and met our flood standards at the time, so it is compliant with the rules, it went through the process, it has substantial damage and has to be rebuilt, but we've changed our elevation requirements since then, that could be a significant, or at least a problem. They'd have to build it a little differently. When we're dealing with structures that are built a long time ago that maybe didn't, they're getting flooded because they weren't meeting any kind of flood regulation, they need to be rebuilt anyway. And I think your larger question in a way is about what kind of assistance is out there, when these kinds of things do happen. And to the mayor's point, I think part of where we're going in general with the flood rules is trying to prevent these kinds of situations from being developed in the first place, because we're making those elevations be built safely kind of in the first place.
Yeah, all that makes sense.
There are only 2 residential structures we could find in Milwaukee that were built to current flood code that would be now out of compliance if we potentially adopt these. So I can go do outreach to those 2 individual homeowners and make sure we understand what exactly their houses were built to. But there are only 2 residential structures built after Milwaukee adopted flood code.
Beth, would you just make sure we do that? That makes a ton of sense. I appreciate it. And Brett, We are at 5:30, but I don't want to cut you off. Are there general policy questions that you need from the council tonight so that you can be prepared for our next discussion?
I think, I guess, just to wrap up, what I would say is the other, I guess, change with respect to the 96 flood areas is that the current code, for whatever reason, has not applied the 96 flood elevations to residential construction, and it no longer seems to make sense to have that be the case. So we're going to make it clear with this change that these 96 flood levels apply to non-residential as well as residential construction. And then I guess in closing, I was going to say that some of the items that we're noting that are things that you may want to talk about in the future, like when we come back to a more substantial policy discussion, that would be about, whether we want to set even higher levels of required elevation above these base flood elevations, whether we want to require people to, when they're doing a project that involves cutting and removing material and filling material, require that they actually produce a net gain in flood storage capacity, whether we want to start looking at the 500-year floodplain. These are the kinds of larger policy questions that I think we'd like to come back to at some point in the future, maybe a year or two, to try to get at some of those comp plan goals that you have. But they're not things that we felt there was time to get into right now. So where we are in the process is, we've gone through this legislative amendment process where we went to the Planning Commission, updated them. They had a recommendation hearing January 12th, recommended approval of these. We're bringing it to you tonight just to kind of prime the pump and kind of let you know what you're going to see. We're planning on March 2nd, bringing the amendments that you more or less saw in your packet to you for consideration for adoption. And the deadline we're trying to meet overall with the state is getting the changes adopted by the end of March. So with that, I guess and to your question, I guess I just would like to know if there are questions or concerns that the council has with respect to these amendments that we're proposing in the packet and anything that we need to address for the next time.
I thought Lisa had a great list of questions, so at some point I would love to hear the answers to her questions, the ones that haven't been answered so far.
Yeah, I mean, I have some clarifying question, which was when you talk base flood zone or base flood level, and then the 96 2.4 feet on top of that, is that the 100-year floodplain level? What you're calling base flood level? Or? When we talk about the base flood elevation, that is the number that we get from FEMA for that 100-year floodplain. Okay. I mean, I wanted to know, I had a list of questions and, I don't know that we want to go into all of them here, given that we wouldn't get a dinner break if we did. But I guess the one, I wanted to know who gets noticed on this rule. Do all these people who have these homes get noticed on this, or have owned this property get noticed on this hearing? Yeah, what we did before, when we started the whole project and in advance of that first hearing with the Planning Commission, we did send notice to all of those 250 or so owners of the properties there. We will send a new notice of the City Council hearing in advance of that as well. So the owners of all those properties will get notice that this is happening. And one of my questions was about, I just kind of wanted to look at the Elk Rock Estates, since that was our most recent example of using this, and know how the process would have been easier and or different under these rules. Yeah. I think we talked about that a little bit this afternoon, and I think overall the short answer to that is the main thing that would have been different would have been that, as I understand it from reviewing the case, where the council ended up with on appeal of that decision, the developer agreed basically to use the 1996 flood elevation as his starting point for flood protection. And with the rules we're proposing, we would have effectively gotten that. I mean, you pushed for what you wanted, and he agreed to that. With these changes, it would have been a requirement for that residential construction to build to either the higher of whatever the base flood elevation was, or the 96 flood, which 2.4 feet above, instead of just that flat 38-foot number. In that case of that property, I think the base flood elevation was around 36.4 feet or so. So if we said instead of
38 feet, he would have been looking to start at 38.8 feet and build a foot above that. I think so. I think in terms of how that review would have gone, it would have been clearer. You wouldn't have been negotiating, I guess, or pushing. It would have been the requirement would have been looking at the 96 flood. Beyond that, I don't think there wouldn't have been significant differences.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think my other questions really are not so much about this, this ordinance. They're about what we do with these properties and how we maintain them, and, whether we're making the most of them when we do end up buying them, like the one on Rusk Road. And that's kind of a discussion probably to have with Peter and others about, that. So I don't think that's really that pertinent to.
Okay.
Right.
Well, can I ask if you did we kind of cover that one question that you had, Lisa, was about kind of a non-conforming situation and when you have to do what to it?
Oh, right.
Did that get addressed, or
No.
So the idea is kind of with a lot of nonconformities in general, if what you have doesn't meet certain elements of the code and it was legally permitted, normally you just keep rolling with it. It's when you want to change something about it that you might open the door to having to do something different. And so an example would be if I have an old house that wasn't built to meet any of the flood standards, if I want to add on to that house, my addition needs to meet the current flood standards. If my addition is worth more than 50% of the market value of my structure, then I'm going to have to bring my whole structure up to meet the code. So that's where that 50% improvement, substantial improvement, or if my house is damaged by more than 50%, that's when I have to start bringing the whole structure up. Otherwise, the new stuff that I do has to meet the current code. So that could make for a little bit of you might have a step up or something if you added a bathroom on. Your new bathroom would have to be built up, to meet the new flood standards, but you wouldn't necessarily have to elevate your whole house for that. Does that help explain? Okay. If Lisa, if you or if anyone, if you think of any other questions, after we've talked here that you would like me to address to the group via email or something, I can coordinate to do that. So. With that,
thank you, Brad.
I didn't have anything else. So thank you guys for your time and attention.
Thanks. All right. So we will see you back in the new Zoom room in around 20 minutes.